Montana Territory, 1872. Winter had come early to the Bitterroot Valley, bringing with it the kind of stillness that made a man confront his own thoughts. Zachary Dawson pulled his sheepskin coat tighter as he guided his horse along the snow-covered trail toward home. At 26, Zach had already lived enough frontier life to age a man twice over, losing his family's Texas ranch in the war, drifting north to Montana, and spending 3 hard years building a modest cattle operation from nothing but grit and stubborn determination. The setting sun painted the snow-capped mountains in hues of amber and gold, a beauty that was wasted on him. Zach had long ago decided that beauty was just another distraction in a land that demanded constant vigilance. Love and attachment were luxuries men like him couldn't afford. The frontier demanded everything a man had just to survive. There was no room for softness, for vulnerability. The graves of those who'd forgotten that lesson dotted the western territories like wildflowers. As the trail curved around a stand of pines, something caught Zach's eye: footprints in the fresh snow, small, delicate impressions that could only belong to a woman. They appeared suddenly from the treeline, crossed the trail, then continued toward the steep ravine that dropped to the creek below. Curious, Zach dismounted, crouching to examine them closer. The tracks were fresh, made within the last hour. Then he noticed something that sent a chill through him, sharper than the December air. The footprints stopped abruptly at the edge of the ravine. Zach rushed to the rim, peering down the steep embankment. About 20 feet below, a splash of blue against the white snow confirmed his fears. A woman lay motionless, half buried in the fresh powder. Without hesitation, he scrambled down the slope, sliding and catching himself on exposed roots and rocks. When he reached her, his breath caught. She was young, no more than 22, with long chestnut hair spilling from beneath her woolen bonnet. Her face was pale but flawless, lips tinged blue from cold. Zach pressed his fingers to her neck and felt a faint pulse. She was alive, but wouldn't be for long in this cold. He gently brushed snow from her face, noting the quality of her clothes: a fine wool traveling dress of deep blue and a coat that spoke of Eastern money. No wedding ring. What was a woman like this doing out here alone? Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of summer sky. For a moment she seemed confused, then fear flashed across her features. "Easy now," Zach said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. "You've had a fall, I'm going to help you." "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Zachary Dawson. My ranch is about 2 miles from here." He examined her quickly for broken bones, finding nothing obviously wrong except a nasty bump on her temple. "Can you tell me your name?" "Lillian," she managed. "Lillian Blackburn." "Well, Miss Blackburn, we need to get you somewhere warm. Can you stand?" When she tried to rise, she cried out in pain, her ankle giving way beneath her. "That settles it," Zach said, gathering her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing against his chest, a fragile burden that stirred something protective in him that he thought had died years ago. "My place is closest. I'll have you there before dark." As he carried her up the embankment, Lillian Blackburn murmured against his chest, "My valise." "By the trees." Zach found her small traveling bag where she'd indicated and secured it to his saddle before lifting her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, cradling her body against his chest to keep her from falling. As they rode, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her head resting against his shoulder. This was trouble, Zach knew. In his experience, beautiful women brought complications, and complications got men killed on the frontier. The sensible thing would be to get her to town as soon as she was stable, let the doctor or hotel deal with her. Yet something about those footprints ending so suddenly in the snow had shaken him in ways he couldn't explain. His cabin came into view as the last light faded from the sky. It wasn't much, a sturdy 2-room structure with a small barn and corral behind it, but it had weathered 3 Montana winters. Smoke still rose from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before leaving that morning. Zach carried Lillian inside and laid her gently on his bed, the only proper piece of furniture he owned besides a table and 2 chairs. He stoked the fire until flames leapt high, filling the room with warmth and flickering light. Only then did he get a proper look at his unexpected guest. She was beautiful in a refined way that seemed out of place in the wilderness: high cheekbones, delicate nose, and brows that arched expressively even in unconsciousness. Her dress, though travel-worn and now damp with snow, was of fine quality. This was no frontier woman, no hardscrabble settler's wife. "Miss Blackburn," he said, touching her shoulder gently. "I need to see to your ankle." Her eyes opened clearer now. "Where am I?" "My cabin. You need to get out of those wet things before you catch your death." He gestured awkwardly toward the chest at the foot of the bed. "I have a spare shirt that might serve as a nightshirt. I'll step outside while you change." Color touched her pale cheeks. "My ankle I cannot manage alone." Zach felt heat rise in his own face. "I'll help with your boots and fetch what you need. The rest you'll have to manage." He removed her boots with careful hands, finding her right ankle swollen but not misshapen. Not broken then, just badly sprained. After gathering what she needed, his cleanest shirt, a basin of water and bandages, he turned his back while she struggled out of her damp clothing. The sound of fabric rustling and her occasional gasps of pain made the small cabin seem even smaller. "You may turn around now," she said finally. His shirt hung to her knees, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, something twisted in Zach's chest, something he had no business feeling. "Your ankle needs wrapping," he said, keeping his voice professional as he knelt before her. As he worked, he asked, "What brought you out this way alone, Miss Blackburn? These mountains are no place for a solitary traveler, especially with snow coming." She winced as he tightened the bandage. "I was on the stage to Helena. There was a man, he'd been watching me since Bozeman. When we stopped at the trading post, I overheard him asking the driver about me." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I slipped away. I thought I could make it to the next station on foot, but I lost the trail in the woods. Then I fell." "Running from someone," Zach observed, tying off the bandage. "Most folks running have a reason." Her eyes met his, defiant despite her vulnerability. "Not all reasons involve wrongdoing, Mr. Dawson." "Fair enough," he said, standing. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I'll take you to town." "Thank you," she said softly. Most men would have ridden past those footprints. The statement hung in the air between them. Zach moved to the fireplace, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest, I'll sleep by the fire." That night, as he lay on a bedroll before the hearth, Zach listened to Lillian's steady breathing from across the room. For 3 years he'd lived alone, speaking more to his horses than to people. He'd convinced himself that's how he preferred it, no attachments, no one to lose, just the land and the work and the changing seasons. Yet now, with a stranger under his roof, the cabin didn't seem small. For the first time in years, it felt like something that might be called home. Morning brought heavy snow that transformed the landscape into a white wilderness. Zach rose early, tended his stock, and returned to find Lillian awake, sitting up in bed with her hair neatly braided. "We won't make town today," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Storms set in. Might last 2-3 days." She nodded, oddly composed for a woman stranded with a stranger. "I can cook, if you'll help me to the fireplace. It's the least I can do." With Zach's assistance, Lillian hobbled to the table, where she sat directing him in preparing a breakfast far superior to his usual fare. She moved her hands expressively as she spoke, transforming simple ingredients into something that filled the cabin with enticing aromas. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, watching her deftly season the skillet of potatoes. "My father sent me to a finishing school in Boston. They believed a proper lady should run an efficient household." A shadow crossed her face, though I doubt they envisioned this particular situation. Over breakfast, Zach found himself talking more than he had in months, telling her about his small herd of cattle, his plans to expand come spring, the challenges of ranching in Montana Territory. She listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. "And your family," she asked, "are they nearby?" Zach's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Lost them. My parents had a place in Texas. Raiders came during the war, torched everything. I was 16, away helping a neighbor, came back to ashes." "I'm so sorry," she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. "Loss leaves a mark on us, doesn't it?" The simple understanding in her voice threatened to unravel something in him. Zach cleared his throat. "Your turn, what's your story?" Lillian's eyes dropped to her plate. "My father was a banker in St. Louis. He died 3 months ago. My uncle took control of the estate as my guardian, though I'm 22 and hardly in need of one." Her jaw tightened. He arranged a marriage for me to a business associate, a man 40 years my senior with a reputation for cruelty to his previous wives. So you ran. I took what was rightfully mine, my mother's jewelry and my own savings, and left. I'm bound for San Francisco. My mother's sister lives there. She'll help me establish myself. She met his eyes. The man following me works for my uncle. Zach nodded, pieces falling into place. That explains why you left the stage, but San Francisco is a long way yet, especially with winter setting in. I'll find a way, she said with quiet determination. I won't be sold like cattle to cement a business arrangement. Something in her fierce independence reminded Zach of himself after losing everything, that stubborn will to determine his own fate. But he also recognized the naivety in her plan, the dangers she couldn't possibly understand. The mountains will be impassable soon, he said. You might need to winter somewhere closer. For 3 days the snow continued, transforming the landscape into an endless white expanse. Confined to the cabin together, Zach and Lillian fell into an unexpected rhythm. She kept to the bed during the day, reading one of the few books he owned, while he tended to his necessary chores. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation that stretched later each night. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, Lillian asked about a photograph tucked on his shelf, a young woman with a serious expression. My sister Elizabeth, Zach said, passing the faded image to her. She married a rancher up north before the war, lost touch during the fighting, been meaning to try and find her once I get the ranch on better footing. Family should be together, Lillian said softly, especially when there's so few of you left. Easier said than done out here, people disappear into the vastness. He took the photograph back, running his thumb over his sister's face. What about you, any siblings? A brother much younger, he's at school back east. Her voice grew distant. I worry what my uncle will make of him. James is gentle, artistic, not cut out for the banking world my uncle inhabits. Zach watched the firelight play across her features. You left a lot behind. Only things, she said firmly, and people who saw me as property. Freedom is worth more. On the 4th day, the storm cleared, revealing a transformed world glittering under a brilliant blue sky. Zach hitched his team to the sleigh he used for winter supply runs and helped Lillian, bundled in his spare coat, into the seat. Town's about 2 hours by sleigh in the snow, he explained, tucking a blanket around her legs. The doctor can look at that ankle, and the hotel will be comfortable enough until you decide your next move. The journey to Bitter Creek was like traveling through a pristine wilderness untouched by human hands. Lillian's face glowed with wonder at the sparkling landscape, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Something in her joy at simple beauty stirred Zach's dormant appreciation for the land he'd chosen. It's magnificent, she breathed, gazing at mountains shrouded in white. I've never seen anything like it. Montana gets under your skin, Zach admitted, hard country but honest. Shows you exactly what it is, good and bad. The settlement of Bitter Creek consisted of one main street with essential businesses, general store, livery, hotel, saloon, and a small church. Zach helped Lillian down at the doctor's modest office, where old Dr. Warren confirmed that her ankle was merely sprained and should heal within a week or two with proper rest. At the hotel, the proprietress, Mrs. Malone, a plump widow with shrewd eyes, looked Lillian over carefully as Zach explained how he'd found her. We don't get many unaccompanied young ladies passing through, Mrs. Malone said, her tone making it clear she suspected impropriety. I have funds to pay for my lodging, Lillian said with quiet dignity, producing several gold coins from her reticule. And I require only a quiet room until the stage comes through again. Next stage isn't due for 10 days, Mrs. Malone informed her. Storms delayed everything east of here. Zach shifted uncomfortably. She'll need supplies. Proper winter clothes. I can manage, Mr. Dawson, Lillian said firmly. You've been more than kind already. But in her eyes he saw uncertainty. This wasn't a woman used to navigating frontier towns alone. I'll return tomorrow, Zach said. After you've rested, we can visit the mercantile then. As he turned to leave, Mrs. Malone called after him. There was a gentleman asking after a young woman fitting this lady's description 2 days ago. seemed mighty interested in finding her. Zach felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. What did you tell him? That I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. Mrs. Malone's lips thinned. I don't much care for men hunting women, whatever their reasons. He said he'd return when the roads cleared. Concern gnawed at Zach as he drove back to his ranch. He'd done his duty, brought Lillian to town, arranged medical care, found her lodging. His obligation was fulfilled, yet as darkness fell and he entered his empty cabin, the silence that had once been comfortable now seemed hollow. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his solitude. The next morning, Zach returned to town, telling himself he was simply checking on Lillian as any decent man would do. He found her in the hotel dining room, dressed in her blue traveling dress, her ankle propped carefully on a cushioned stool. "Mr. Dawson," she said, her face lighting up in a way that made his chest tighten. "I didn't expect you so early. Thought we might get to the mercantile before it gets busy." He removed his hat, suddenly aware of his rough appearance compared to the other guests. "How's the ankle?" "Much improved." Dr. Warren provided a walking stick. She gestured to a polished cane leaning against her chair. "And Mrs. Malone has been most helpful, though she asks a great many questions." Zach smiled despite himself. Small towns run on gossip. By now, half of Bitter Creek thinks you're either a duchess in disguise or a notorious bank robber. Her laughter, bright and unexpected, drew glances from other diners. "Which would you prefer me to be?" "Neither," he said honestly. "You seem plenty interesting as Lillian Blackburn." Something passed between them then, a current of understanding that made Zach look away first. This woman was passing through, running toward a new life that had nothing to do with Montana or ranching or him. At the mercantile, Zach helped Lillian select practical items: a heavy wool coat, boots lined with fur, sturdy gloves, and a warm bonnet. She moved through the store with careful precision, examining quality, comparing prices, asking intelligent questions that belied her Eastern upbringing. "You learn quickly," Zach observed as she haggled successfully with the shopkeeper over the price of the coat. "Survival requires adaptation," she replied, a hint of steel beneath her gentle demeanor. "My finishing school education is less useful here than watching how the other women shop." As they left the store, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A stagecoach had arrived, unusual given the recent weather. Passengers disembarked, stamping feet and stretching after the uncomfortable journey. The last to step down was a tall man in an expensive Eastern coat. Something in his purposeful manner made Zach instinctively step in front of Lillian, blocking her from view. "The hotel," he murmured, "now." Back in her room, Lillian paced despite her injured ankle, her composure cracking. "It's him, my uncle's man, Greeley. He must have taken another route when I left the stage." Zach peered through the window curtain. The man was questioning people on the street, showing something, likely a photograph. "This complicates things." "I need to leave town," she said decisively. "Tonight, if possible." "And go where? The next settlement is 40 miles. You'd never make it in this weather." Lillian's eyes met his, desperate yet determined. "I won't go back, I can't." Zach ran a hand through his hair, weighing options he'd never expected to consider. "My ranch," he said finally. "You can stay there until this man gives up and moves on. It's remote enough that no one would think to look there, and I could bring supplies from town." "I couldn't impose." "It's not imposition if I'm offering," he cut in. "Besides, I owe you for improving my cooking skills." A smile ghosted across her worried face. "When can we leave?" "After dark. Pack only what you need. I'll make arrangements." That evening, Zach returned with his sleigh, meeting Lillian at the hotel's rear entrance. He'd spent the afternoon quietly spreading word that the young lady was continuing west on tomorrow's stage, a false trail to buy them time. Under cover of darkness and falling snow, they slipped out of town, the sleigh runners making little noise on the fresh powder. Lillian sat close beside him, tension evident in the rigid line of her shoulders. "Did anyone see you leave?" Zach asked as they cleared the town limits. "No, Mrs. Malone helped me. She understood my situation better than I realized." Lillian clutched her small bag in her lap. "She's known men like my uncle before." They traveled in silence for a time, only the sound of the horses breathing and the soft shush of runners on snow. The night was clear, stars brilliant against the black sky, the moon casting enough light to follow the trail. "Thank you," Lillian said finally. "You've risked much for a stranger." "Not such a stranger anymore," Zach replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. In 4 days he'd told this woman more about himself than he'd shared with anyone in years. At the ranch, he settled her in the cabin while he tended to the horses. When he returned, she had a fire blazing and water heating for coffee. "I took the liberty," she said, gesturing to the stove. "I hope you don't mind." "It's good to come back to a warm house," he admitted, hanging his coat by the door. That night he again made his bed by the fire, insisting she take the proper bed. As they lay in the darkened cabin, separated by mere feet yet divided by propriety and their vastly different circumstances, Lillian's voice came soft through the shadows. "What will you do when spring comes?" "With your ranch?" Zach stared at the ceiling, considering. "Drive my herd north to the new railroad spur. Prices are better there, buy more breeding stock, maybe build a proper house eventually." "It sounds like a good life." "Simple anyway," he said. "What about you, after San Francisco?" A long pause followed. "I'm not entirely sure. I have some education, perhaps teaching or bookkeeping." "No plans to marry?" "Not unless it's for love," she said firmly. "I've seen too many women trapped in loveless arrangements. I'd rather make my own way." The conviction in her voice stirred something in Zach, admiration, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who valued independence above security. He fell asleep thinking of footprints in snow, of paths chosen and unchosen, of journeys interrupted by fate or providence. Days stretched into a week at the ranch, and with each passing day, the awkwardness between them faded into comfortable routine. Lillian's ankle improved steadily, allowing her to move about the cabin and even venture outside on clear days. She proved surprisingly capable, learning quickly how to manage the stove, mend clothing, and even assist with minor chores despite her refined upbringing. For his part, Zach found himself making small improvements to the cabin that he'd neglected for years, repairing a loose floorboard, hanging proper curtains purchased in town, building a second chair for the table. Simple changes that transformed his bachelor quarters into something more welcoming. On his trips to town for supplies, he listened carefully for news of the man searching for Lillian. Greeley remained at the hotel, growing increasingly frustrated as his quarry seemed to have vanished. The false trail Zach had laid about her boarding a stage seemed to be holding, but he knew the man wouldn't give up easily. One evening, returning from checking his cattle in the lower pasture, Zach found Lillian standing in the yard, gazing at the mountains painted gold by the setting sun. Her chestnut hair gleamed in the fading light, and something about her stillness, her obvious appreciation for the wild beauty around her, made his heart stutter. "It's magnificent," she said as he approached. "I understand now why people brave such hardship to live here." "Gets in your blood," Zach agreed, coming to stand beside her. "The freedom of it." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Is that why you stay, for the freedom?" "Partly," he admitted. "After losing everything in Texas, I needed somewhere to begin again. Somewhere big enough to get lost in." "And have you gotten lost?" The question held layers of meaning that made Zach pause, maybe until recently. Her gaze held his for a long moment before she looked away. "I should check on dinner. The stew needs stirring." That night, as they sat before the fire, Lillian mending one of his shirts while he whittled a piece of pine, she broke their comfortable silence. "Tell me about your sister, Elizabeth. What was she like?" Zach's hands stilled. "Stubborn, smart, could outride most men by the time she was 12. Our mother despaired of ever making a lady of her." He smiled at the memory. "She married young, 17, to a rancher named Thomas Miller. Good man. They headed north to Montana before the war turned everything upside down." "And you've had no word?" "Last letter came in 62. They'd settled near the Yellowstone River, had a baby on the way." He resumed his whittling, shavings falling to the floor. "After our parents died, I tried finding her, sent letters. Nothing came back. But you believe she's alive?" It wasn't a question, but Zach answered anyway. "Have to, she's all the family I've got left." "When spring comes," Lillian said carefully, "you should look for her. Family shouldn't remain separated when there's a chance to be reunited. The sincerity in her voice made him look up. What about your brother? Will you try to bring him to San Francisco? Sadness shadowed her features. James is only 14. Legally, my uncle controls his whereabouts until he's of age, but I'll find a way to communicate with him to make sure he's well. Her fingers worked the needle through fabric. I won't abandon him. You're braver than most men I know, Zach said quietly, walking away from security, facing the unknown, all to preserve your freedom. Not brave, she countered, desperate perhaps. There are worse fates than poverty or hardship. Like marriage to a man you don't love. Like living without the freedom to choose your own path. Her eyes met his across the firelit room. Even a difficult path freely chosen is better than an easy one forced upon you. In that moment, Zach saw her clearly, not as a refined Eastern woman out of place in the wilderness, but as someone whose inner strength matched his own, whose determination had carried her across half a continent in pursuit of her own destiny. The realization disturbed him in ways he couldn't articulate. 2 weeks after Lillian's arrival at the ranch, Zach rode into town for supplies, carrying a letter she'd written to her aunt in San Francisco. The settlement was buzzing with news. A band of outlaws had robbed a bank in Helena and were believed to be heading south, possibly passing near Bitter Creek. At the general store, Zach overheard a conversation that sent a chill through him. That fellow from back east is still asking about the young woman, the storekeeper told another customer, offering good money now to anyone with information. Mighty persistent, the other man remarked. Must be something valuable he's after. Word is she took something that belongs to her uncle, family jewels or some such. Greeley's got papers saying he's authorized to retrieve them. Zach bought his supplies quickly and headed back, concern growing with each mile. The situation was escalating. Not only was Greeley still searching, but he was now painting Lillian as a thief, giving himself legal justification to pursue her. When he reached the ranch, he found Lillian in the yard, hanging laundry despite the cold. Her cheeks were flushed with exertion, her hair partially escaping its braid. Something about the domestic sight of her among his rough surroundings struck him like a physical blow. There's trouble, he said without preamble, dismounting. Greeley's still in town, offering rewards for information about you. He's telling people you stole valuable jewelry from your uncle. Lillian's hands stilled on the damp shirt she was hanging. The jewelry was my mother's, left specifically to me in her will. She lifted her chin. But of course he would twist the truth to serve his purpose. He has papers, Lillian, legal documents that would convince most frontier lawmen. Fear flickered across her face before resolve replaced it. Then I need to move on. The stage to Virginia City leaves tomorrow. From there I can connect to the western route. It's not safe, Zach argued. Greeley's watching the stage office, and there's word of outlaws in the area. I can't stay here indefinitely, she said, lowering her voice though there was no one to overhear. You've risked enough harboring me. If someone were to discover I've been here all along, your reputation would be ruined. Hang my reputation, he said sharply. I'm worried about your safety. They stood facing each other in the cold yard, the wet laundry forgotten between them. Something had shifted between them, some unspoken boundary crossed. Zachary, she said softly, using his full name for the first time, you've been more than kind, but this isn't your battle. What if I want it to be? The words escaped before he could consider their implications. What if I don't want you to leave? The confession hung in the frigid air. Lillian's eyes widened, surprise and something warmer kindling in their depths. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Zach turned sharply, hand going to the revolver at his hip. 3 men on horseback were coming up the trail toward the ranch. Inside, he ordered, now. Lillian gathered her laundry basket and hurried to the cabin as Zach moved to intercept the visitors. As they drew closer, he relaxed slightly. It was Edward Pierce, his nearest neighbor, along with his 2 ranch hands. Dawson, Pierce called in greeting, reining in his horse. Thought I should warn you, riders spotted near Johnson's place yesterday. Might be those outlaws from the Helena robbery. Appreciate the warning, Zach said, keeping his tone casual. You riding patrol. Heading to town to speak with the sheriff, Pierce's eyes drifted to the cabin where smoke rose steadily from the chimney. Heard you had a guest staying with you. Zach's face revealed nothing. News travels fast. Small communities, Pierce said with a shrug. Mrs. Malone mentioned you'd been buying supplies for two, said it was good to see you finally settling down. The implication was clear, and Zach neither confirmed nor denied it. You and your men want coffee before you continue. No time, Pierce declined. Just wanted to make sure you were aware. Keep your rifle handy, Dawson. As the men rode away, Zach returned to the cabin, finding Lillian standing tensely by the window. Neighbors, he explained, warning about possible outlaws in the area. But they know someone is staying with you, she said, her expression troubled. Word is spreading. It's only a matter of time before Greeley hears, Zach acknowledged. We need a plan. That night they discussed options long into the evening. Lillian could attempt to leave on the morning stage, but Greeley would likely be watching. She could wait until he gave up and left town, but there was no guarantee he would do so anytime soon. There's another possibility, Zach said finally, staring into the fire rather than at her. We could marry. Lillian's sharp intake of breath made him look up. She was watching him with wide, startled eyes. As your husband, I'd have legal standing to protect you from Greeley's claims, he continued quickly. Even with his papers, he couldn't force a married woman to return to her uncle's guardianship. Marriage is a serious proposition, Mr. Dawson, she said carefully, not a strategy to be employed lightly. I know that, he stood suddenly restless. I'm not suggesting it lightly. Then why are you suggesting it? The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. Zach turned to face her fully. Because in 3 weeks you've brought more life to this place than I've known in years. Because I find myself dreading the day you'll continue your journey. Because I think we could build something good here together. Her face softened, but uncertainty remained in her eyes. We barely know each other. I know you're brave and resourceful. I know you can make a home even in a rough cabin in the wilderness. I know I want to see what kind of life we might make if you stayed. He stepped closer. And I think you might want that too. Lillian rose from her chair, moving to stand before him. I came west seeking freedom, not a new obligation. I'm not offering an obligation, Zach said quietly. I'm offering a partnership. She studied his face in the firelight, searching for something. I need time to consider. Of course, he nodded, stepping back to give her space. It's a big decision. Yes, she agreed softly. It is. The next morning, Zach rose early and went to tend to his stock, giving Lillian space to think. The sky threatened snow again, heavy clouds gathering over the mountains. As he worked in the barn, his mind churned over the proposal he'd made. It had been impulsive, perhaps, but not insincere. The thought of Lillian continuing her journey, disappearing from his life as suddenly as she'd entered it, left an emptiness he hadn't expected to feel. When he returned to the cabin, she was waiting for him at the table, her hands folded before her, her expression composed yet vulnerable. I've considered your proposal, she began as he hung up his coat. Before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted. Zach moved quickly to the window, his body tensing as he saw 3 riders approaching, none of them familiar. Stay inside, he ordered, reaching for his rifle above the door. Lock the door behind me. Outside, he positioned himself on the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. The riders stopped a respectful distance from the cabin. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-eyed. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek, raised his hand in greeting. Looking for water for our horses, he called. Been riding since dawn. Pumps by the barn, Zach replied, not moving from his position. Help yourselves, then move on. The scarred man nodded, but his eyes scanned the property with too much interest. Mighty obliged, you living out here all alone. Not that it's your business, Zach said evenly. The men exchanged glances that confirmed Zach's suspicions. These were the outlaws Pierce had warned about, likely scouting isolated homesteads for easy targets. His finger tensed on the trigger of his rifle. No offense meant, the leader said with a forced smile, just making conversation. Water's by the barn, Zach repeated, then I expect you'll be on your way. The men moved toward the barn, but Zach noticed they spread out slightly, positioning themselves strategically. He remained on the porch, rifle ready, watching as they watered their horses with deliberate slowness. Inside the cabin, he knew Lillian would be watching, possibly frightened. He wished he'd had time to tell her where he kept his spare pistol to prepare her for this possibility. As the outlaws finished watering their horses, the leader turned back toward the cabin. "Mighty fine place you got here, remote, though. Must be hard managing alone." "I manage," Zach said coldly. The man's hand drifted toward his holstered gun. "Now, friend, we don't want trouble, just looking for supplies. Maybe valuables you might be willing to share." Zach raised his rifle, aiming directly at the leader's chest. "I'm not your friend and I'm not sharing anything. Mount up and ride out or I start shooting." Tension stretched between them, the other two outlaws now reaching for their weapons. Just as Zach prepared to fire, the cabin door opened behind him. "Zachary," Lillian's voice came steady and clear. "Is everything all right, husband?" She stepped onto the porch beside him, a shotgun held confidently in her hands. Her appearance seemed to surprise the outlaws, who hesitated at the sight of a well-dressed woman with a determined expression and a deadly weapon. "Just explaining to these men that they're not welcome here," Zach replied, not taking his eyes off the leader. "I see." Lillian's voice remained calm, though Zach could sense her fear. "Gentlemen, my husband is an excellent shot, and I assure you I know how to use this shotgun. We have nothing of value to steal, and the nearest neighbors have already been alerted to suspicious riders in the area." The leader's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation: two armed defenders, an isolated location, but now complications he hadn't anticipated. "No need for bloodshed," he said finally, backing toward his horse. "We'll be moving on." "Wise decision," Zach said, his rifle still trained on them. The men mounted and rode away, looking back several times until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Zach lower his weapon and turn to Lillian, who was trembling slightly despite her brave front. "Where did you get the shotgun?" he asked, taking it gently from her hands. "From under your bed." "I saw you clean it last week." Her composure cracked slightly. "Were those the outlaws?" "I believe so." He guided her back inside, closing and barring the door. "That was quick thinking, calling me husband." It seemed prudent to present a united front. She sat at the table, her hands still shaking. "Do you think they'll return?" "Not today, but they might with reinforcements." Zach placed the weapons within easy reach. "We should prepare to leave for town. It's not safe here now." Lillian nodded, then met his eyes steadily. "Before we were interrupted, I was about to answer your proposal." Despite the danger they'd just faced, Zach found himself holding his breath. "I accept," she said simply, "not merely for protection from Greeley, but because I believe what you said, that we could build something good together." Relief and joy surged through him, emotions he'd not allowed himself to feel in years. "You're sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she said, a smile breaking through her tension. "Though I must warn you, I know very little about cattle ranching." "And I know nothing about finishing schools," he countered, reaching for her hand across the table. "But I'm willing to learn about whatever matters to you." Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and steady now. "Then I believe we have an understanding, Mr. Dawson." "I believe we do, Miss Blackburn." They prepared quickly, packing essentials and securing the cabin as best they could. Zach hitched the team to the sleigh while Lillian gathered her few possessions and the small bag containing her mother's jewelry, the tangible remnants of her past life. As they drove toward town, snow began falling again, soft flakes that settled on their shoulders and melted in their hair. Despite the danger behind and the uncertainty ahead, Zach felt a lightness he'd not experienced in years. Beside him, Lillian watched the landscape with clear eyes, no longer a woman in flight but one moving purposefully toward a chosen future. In town, they went directly to the church, where the surprised minister, Reverend Collins, listened to their request for immediate marriage with raised eyebrows. "This is rather sudden," he observed, looking between them. "Are you certain this isn't a decision made in haste?" "Sometimes clarity comes suddenly, Reverend," Lillian replied, "but that doesn't make it any less true." With Mrs. Malone and the general storekeeper serving as witnesses, they exchanged simple vows in the small church as snow fell outside the windows. Zach found himself remembering those footprints in the snow, ending so suddenly at the ravine's edge, how close he had come to riding past, to missing this unexpected turn in his solitary path. As Lillian spoke her vows in a clear, unwavering voice, her eyes never leaving his, he silently promised to make himself worthy of the trust she was placing in him. After the ceremony, they faced their remaining challenge. Greeley was still in town, still searching for Lillian. Now legally her husband, Zach had the authority to protect her from her uncle's claims, but confrontation seemed inevitable. They found him at the hotel, a tall, severe man with cold eyes and an expensive Eastern suit that marked him as an outsider in this frontier town. "Mr. Greeley," Zach said, entering the hotel dining room with Lillian on his arm. "I believe you've been looking for my wife." The man's head snapped up, his gaze fixing first on Lillian, then narrowing as he processed Zach's words. "Wife, what nonsense is this?" "We were married this afternoon," Lillian said calmly. "May I introduce my husband, Zachary Dawson?" Greeley stood, anger darkening his features. "This is preposterous. I have legal authorization from your uncle, your rightful guardian." "My uncle has no authority over a married woman," Lillian interrupted. "The law is quite clear on that matter." "This is some frontier trick," Greeley spat, turning to Zach. "She's promised to another man, there will be legal consequences." "The only promise that matters is the one she made to me before God and witnesses today," Zach replied evenly. "As for legal consequences, I understand attempting to force a married woman to return against her might be considered kidnapping in Montana territory." Mrs. Malone, who had been watching from nearby, stepped forward. "The sheriff would certainly take an interest in such a matter, Mr. Greeley, especially given your persistent inquiries about a lady traveling alone." Greeley looked between them, calculating his options. "The jewelry she took was left to me by my mother," Lillian said firmly. "I have the will and documentation proving it, which I'd be happy to present to a judge if necessary." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Greeley's shoulders slumped slightly in defeat. "Your uncle will not be pleased." "My uncle's pleasure has never been my primary concern," Lillian replied. "You may tell him I wish him well, but my life is my own now." After Greeley stalked away, promising vaguely that they hadn't heard the last of the matter, Zach and Lillian secured a room at the hotel. With outlaws possibly watching the ranch and a snowstorm setting in, it seemed wiser to remain in town for a few days. In the privacy of their room, the reality of their hasty marriage settled around them. Lillian stood by the window, watching snow blanket the small town, while Zach built a fire in the small grate. "He may return with more legal pressure," she said quietly. "My uncle isn't a man who accepts defeat easily." "By then we'll have established our life together," Zach replied, joining her at the window. "The longer you're married, the less claim he'll have." She turned to face him, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "This is not how I imagined beginning married life." "Nor I," he admitted, "but I meant what I said in the church, Lillian. I'll be a good husband to you if you'll give me the chance." "And I meant my vows as well." She reached for his hand, her touch still new and wondrous to him. "This may have begun as a practical arrangement, but I believe it could become much more." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tender care, learning the contours of newfound intimacy. In the quiet aftermath, as Lillian slept peacefully beside him, Zach found himself thinking of all the solitary years he'd spent, convinced that the frontier was no place for love, that attachment was a weakness he couldn't afford. How wrong he had been! Spring came early to the Bitterroot Valley, bringing with it renewal and promise. The ranch, neglected during the harsh winter months, required extensive work, but Zach no longer faced the tasks alone. Lillian proved herself an eager partner, learning quickly and bringing order to aspects of ranch life he'd overlooked for years. With the thaw, they began building an addition to the cabin, 2 new rooms that would transform the bachelor quarters into a proper home. Lillian planted a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky Montana soil through sheer determination. Greeley had left Bitter Creek after sending a final threatening letter, which they'd promptly shown to the sheriff. With no legal grounds to force Lillian's return and her marriage firmly established, her uncle's claims held little weight in the territory. Still, they remained vigilant, aware that wealth and power could reach even into remote frontiers. As summer approached, Zach prepared for his annual cattle drive north. For the first time, the prospect of leaving the ranch filled him with reluctance rather than relief. "I'll be gone at least 3 weeks," he told Lillian as they sat on the new porch he'd built facing the mountains. "Mrs. Pierce offered to have you stay with them, but—" "I'll remain here," she said firmly. "This is my home now, I can manage." Pride and concern warred within him. "It's a long time to be alone." "I won't be entirely alone. The Millers from town will check on me, and I have the new rifle you've taught me to use." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, I have plans for while you're away. I want to surprise you." The morning of his departure arrived with perfect June weather, the mountains vivid against a cloudless sky. Zach held Lillian longer than necessary before mounting his horse, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the scent of her hair. "Be careful," she whispered against his chest. "Come back to me." "Always," he promised, kissing her one last time before riding out with his small crew of hired hands. The cattle drive proved profitable beyond expectations. With the new railroad spur operating, buyers were offering premium prices for healthy Montana beef. Zach sold his entire herd for nearly double what he'd anticipated, providing funds that would secure their future through the coming winter and beyond. On the return journey, as they neared the familiar valley, one of his hands pointed to a distant ridge. "Ryder's boss coming fast." Tension coiled through Zach as he spotted 3 men approaching at speed. His mind immediately went to Greeley, to the outlaws they'd encountered in winter, to all the dangers the frontier could present to a woman alone. As the riders drew closer, he recognized Edward Pierce in the lead. The rancher reined in hard, his expression grave. "Dawson," he called, "been looking for you on the trail. You need to get home." Fear gripped Zach's heart. "Is it Lillian? Is she hurt?" "She's fine," Pierce assured him quickly. "But there's a situation. A woman arrived in town last week asking about you, says she's your sister." "Elizabeth," Zach's voice cracked on the name. "My sister is in Bitter Creek. She's at your ranch now." "Rode out with Lillian 3 days ago," Pierce's expression softened. "Thought you'd want to know before you arrived home." Zach spurred his horse forward, leaving his men to follow with the pack horses and supplies. He rode hard through the afternoon, thoughts racing ahead of him. Elizabeth alive here in Montana, after all these years, after all his searching. As he crested the final rise before his ranch, he pulled his horse to a stop, momentarily overwhelmed by the sight below. The cabin had been transformed. A fresh coat of whitewash gleamed in the late afternoon sun. New curtains hung in the windows. Flowers bloomed in beds along the front path where none had grown before, and on the porch stood 2 women, one tall and fair, unmistakably his sister even at this distance, and beside her Lillian, shading her eyes as she watched for his approach. Zach rode down the slope at a gallop, dismounting before his horse fully stopped. Elizabeth ran to meet him, her face alight with joy and tears. "Zach," she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "Oh God, it's really you." He held his sister tightly, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. She was thinner than he remembered, with fine lines around her eyes that spoke of hardship but unmistakably Elizabeth. "How," he finally managed, "how did you find me?" "Your letters," she said, drawing back to look at him. "They reached us eventually, but we'd moved further north. By the time I wrote back, you'd left Texas." She smiled through her tears. "I've been searching for years, following rumors of a Dawson raising cattle in Montana." Lillian approached them, her own eyes bright with emotion. "She arrived in town asking about you, Mrs. Malone sent her directly to us. I couldn't believe it when I found your wife instead of some grizzled old rancher," Elizabeth laughed. "The Zachary I remembered swore he'd never marry." Zach reached for Lillian, drawing her to his side. "I found reason to change my mind." "She's been telling me all about how you met," Elizabeth said, "following footprints in the snow that ended too suddenly. It sounds like Providence." "It was," Zach agreed, looking at his wife with all the love he'd discovered in himself over the past months. "The best kind of accident." That evening, gathered around the table in their improved cabin, Elizabeth shared her story. Her husband had died in a skirmish with hostile warriors 2 years after they'd settled near the Yellowstone. She'd managed alone with her young son for several years before remarrying. Her second husband had died of fever the previous winter, leaving her once again alone. But not anymore, Zach said firmly. You and your boy will stay with us as long as you need. Thomas is with friends in Helena, Elizabeth explained. He's 15 now, so like our father you'd hardly believe it. I wanted to find you first, make sure. I'm glad you did, Lillian said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Family belongs together. Later that night, after Elizabeth had retired to the new guest room, Zach and Lillian stood on their porch, watching stars appear above the mountains. You knew she was coming, he said, still processing the day's events. That's why you insisted on staying here alone. Lillian nodded. Mrs. Malone sent word the day after you left. I wanted it to be a surprise. She leaned against him. Are you happy? More than I ever thought possible. He turned to face her, framing her face with his hands. You've given me back everything I thought I'd lost, a family, a home that's more than just shelter, a future worth building. We've given those things to each other, she corrected gently. And there's one more gift coming. Her hand moved to rest on her stomach, a gesture whose meaning took a moment to register. When understanding dawned, Zach's heart seemed to stop before racing forward. A child, he whispered. You're certain? Dr. Warren confirmed it last week. Her smile was radiant in the gathering dusk. By winter, there will be one more Dawson in this valley. Zach gathered her close, overcome with a joy so intense it bordered on pain. From his solitary existence, from her desperate flight, they had somehow forged this miracle. A family reborn, a future neither could have imagined when he first spotted those footprints ending too suddenly in the snow. I love you, Lillian Dawson, he said against her hair, more than I have words to tell you. Show me instead, she whispered, leading him back toward the warmth of their home, toward the life they were building together in this wild, beautiful land that had once seemed too harsh for love. And as the Montana night deepened around their cabin, windows glowing with lamplight against the darkness, Zach knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true path at last, not in solitude, but in the courage to follow unexpected footprints wherever they might lead.